She texted me. I'm just not happy anymore. I think it's time to end this. I replied, I understand. Then I walked away without looking back. Months later, she tried reaching out but realized I had already moved on completely. I'm just not happy anymore. I think it's time to end this. I read it twice. Not because I didn't understand it the first time, but because I wanted to make sure I was reading it correctly before I decided how I was going to respond. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Not a dramatic Friday night. Not a stormy Sunday morning. A plain, gray, forgettable Tuesday. I was sitting in a coffee shop on the corner of West 86th and Broadway, half working on a project I'd been putting off for 2 weeks. My cup had gone cold. My laptop screen was open, but I hadn't typed a single word in 40 minutes. And then Serafina's message arrived. Just like that. No call first. No hey, can we talk? No warning. Just 11 words dropped into our conversation like a stone into still water. And I sat there, watching the ripples spread. The worst part wasn't the words themselves. The worst part was the casual way they were delivered. No caps lock. No exclamation mark. No follow-up message to soften the blow. Just 11 words, a period at the end, and then silence. Like she'd placed a grenade on the table between us, and then walked calmly out of the room. I've thought about that moment 100 times since then. And every time I think about it, the thing that gets me isn't the pain. It's how quiet it was. How completely, brutally quiet. I set my phone face down on the table, picked up my coffee, took a sip of something that was now cold and bitter. And I thought to myself, she didn't even have the decency to call. But I didn't type that. I didn't type anything for almost 3 full minutes. I just sat there, completely still, watching the barista wipe down the counter across the room, listening to the low murmur of conversations that weren't mine, feeling the weight of something enormous pressing down on my chest without making a single sound. Then I picked up the phone, and I typed 2 words. I understand. Sent. Phone back down. Eyes back to the window. And that was it. That was the end. I didn't realize it then, not completely, but that moment changed everything. If you enjoy real stories like this, subscribe, because what happened next changed everything for me. Here's what I had with Serafina. 2 years and 4 months. We met at a gallery opening in Chelsea that neither of us actually cared about, both of us standing in front of the same piece of art, both of us pretending to understand it. She laughed first. I laughed second. And somewhere between that shared joke about a canvas that was probably worth more than both our apartments combined, something clicked. She was 26. I was 28. We lived in Manhattan, a 12-minute subway ride apart, close enough to feel constant, far enough to feel like we each had room to breathe. Or at least, that's what I told myself at the beginning. By month 6, she had a drawer at my place. By month 12, she had a shelf. By month 18, I had started thinking about what the next step looked like. Not in a rushed way. In the kind of quiet, slow way that happens when you stop thinking of something as temporary and start letting it settle into the permanent parts of your mind. I had started thinking about apartments. About neighborhoods. About the way Sunday mornings could look if they were every Sunday morning instead of just the ones we planned. I hadn't said any of this out loud yet, but I was carrying it. That's the part that people don't talk about enough when a relationship ends. It's not just the person you lose. It's the version of the future you'd been quietly building in your head. All those unspoken plans, all those half-formed ideas, all that invisible architecture, it all collapses at once, and nobody outside can see the rubble because it was never visible to begin with. When Serafina sent that text, she wasn't just ending what we had. She was demolishing something I hadn't even shown her yet. And she didn't even know it. That's the part that hurt the most. Not the loss of what existed. The loss of what I was about to say. We were good on paper. Really good. The kind of couple that other people pointed at in restaurants and said they look happy. And they weren't wrong. We were for a while. We had routines. Saturday morning runs along the Hudson, followed by eggs and coffee at this small place on Jane Street, where the owner knew our order before we sat down. Sunday afternoon bookstore wandering, coming home with books we'd never fully finish, leaving them on each other's nightstands like tiny gifts. She was a graphic designer. Sharp eye, strong opinions, the kind of person who could walk into a room and immediately rearrange it in her head into something better. I worked in urban planning, long hours, constant revision, the slow and unsexy work of trying to make a city more livable for people who'd never know your name. We were both stubborn, both independent, both the kind of people who needed space to think and then resented being given too much of it. That tension, that specific, particular tension, was always there underneath everything. Like a low hum you stop hearing after a while, but that never actually goes away. I thought we were managing it. I thought we had found the balance. I was wrong. But here's the thing. I didn't find that out from her. Not directly. Not honestly. I found it out from 11 words on a Tuesday afternoon in a coffee shop on the Upper West Side. And that tells you everything you need to know about how she chose to handle things. Looking back, the signs were there. Of course they were. They always are. You just convince yourself they mean something else. About 3 weeks before the text, things started shifting. She was less communicative. Not dramatically, not obviously, just slightly less present. Messages that used to come back within minutes started taking hours. Plans that used to be made easily started requiring more back and forth, more negotiation, more of that exhausting energy where you can feel someone pulling away, but you can't quite put your finger on the rope. I noticed. I'm not going to pretend I didn't. But I made the mistake that a lot of people make in long relationships. I told myself it was just a season. I told myself she was stressed about work. She had a major client launch coming up. I knew that. I told myself that relationships have natural rhythms, that closeness expands and contracts, that I was probably overthinking it. I was very good at convincing myself. 2 weeks before the text, we had dinner at this Italian place she loved in the West Village. It should have been easy. We'd been to that restaurant a dozen times. Always comfortable, always good. But that night, there was a strange formality to everything. Like we were two people who knew each other well, but were somehow performing knowing each other for an invisible audience. We talked about safe things. Her work. My project. A show we'd both been watching but hadn't had time to finish. We didn't fight. We didn't argue. We just talked carefully. And somewhere in the careful, deliberate way we moved through that dinner, I felt something that I couldn't name at the time. It felt like being handed a glass of water that looked fine but tasted off. You're not sure. You keep drinking. You tell yourself it's probably nothing. 1 week before the text, she canceled on me twice. The first time, work. The second time, she said she was tired. I said that was fine. And I meant it. Or I thought I did. But there was a moment after the second cancellation, sitting alone in my apartment watching the city lights come on through the window, where I had a thought that I pushed away almost immediately. The thought was, something is wrong. Not she's busy. Not she needs space. Something is wrong. I pushed it away. I made dinner for one, watched something I can't even remember now, and went to sleep telling myself it would be fine. 1 week later, 11 words arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, and I understood, finally, that I had been right to be worried. I had just been wrong to stay quiet about it. People have asked me that. My friend Bramwell asked me that, sitting across from me in a bar 3 days after it happened. Why didn't you push back? He said. Why didn't you ask her what that even meant? Fair question. Here's my honest answer. Because I'd been carrying an uncomfortable feeling for 3 weeks. Because something in me had already been doing the math and coming up with a number I didn't want to see. Because when those 11 words arrived, as much as they hurt, and they did hurt, deeply, they also clarified something that had been blurry for a while. She wasn't happy. She decided. She'd already made the decision, probably a while ago, and the text was just the administrative part. The relationship was already over. It had been over before she typed a single word. What I was reading wasn't a beginning of a conversation. It was a notification. And I have enough self-respect to understand the difference between someone who wants to talk through something hard and someone who wants to hand you an outcome they've already finalized. If she had called me, voice breaking, saying she was scared and confused and didn't know what to do, I would have shown up. I would have listened for hours. I would have met her exactly where she was. But she sent a text. 11 words. Period at the end. No follow-up. That wasn't someone who was struggling. That was someone who had already made up their mind and was doing the paperwork. So I said I understand. Because I did. And I walked away. Because that's what you do when someone shows you, with absolute clarity, exactly where they stand. She didn't respond to I understand for almost 4 hours. I know because I didn't check. I know because when I finally looked at my phone again, it was nearly 6 p.m., the coffee shop had gotten louder with the after-work crowd, and my laptop was still open to a blank document. When she did respond, it was one line. Okay, I think this is for the best. I didn't reply to that. There was nothing to say. I packed up my laptop, left a $3 tip for a coffee I hadn't really finished, put on my coat, and walked out onto Broadway. It was cold. The kind of cold that Manhattan gets in late February where the wind doesn't come at you from one direction. It finds the gaps in everything. The space between your collar and your neck, the hem of your jacket, all the places you thought you'd covered. I walked. Not toward anything. Not away from anything, really. I just walked. Down Broadway, past the grocery stores and the coffee shops and the dry cleaners, and the people walking fast with their shoulders up around their ears, all of them inside their own worlds. None of them knowing that I'd just watched 2 years of my life fold up and disappear in the space of a text exchange. That anonymity of New York, I'd always taken it for granted. That night, for the first time, I was grateful for it. Nobody was going to ask me if I was okay. Nobody was going to look at my face and see anything. I was just another person in a coat, walking south on Broadway in the cold. I could fall apart in complete privacy. And I did, a little. Not dramatically. There were no tears on the street. It was more like something went out. Like a light switched off somewhere behind my eyes, quietly, efficiently, without announcement. I got home around 8. Made something simple. Ate without tasting it. Sat on the couch for a long time, not watching anything, not thinking anything in particular, just existing in the new shape of a life that had just changed its outline. At some point, I fell asleep sitting up. When I woke up at 2 a.m., stiff and disoriented, I picked up my phone. She hadn't messaged again. I put the phone down, went to bed, and that was the first night of what came next. There's a particular kind of clarity that arrives at 2 a.m. when everything is quiet and nothing is comfortable. It's not pleasant, but it's honest. And somewhere in that first night, in the hours between falling asleep on the couch and lying in the actual dark of my bedroom staring at a ceiling I knew too well, I made a decision. Not dramatically, not with a speech or a declaration, just a quiet, firm thing that settled into place like a key turning in a lock. I was not going to chase this. I was not going to send a follow-up message asking for clarification. I was not going to reach out to mutual friends to get her side of things. I was not going to drunk dial her on a Saturday night 3 weeks from now. I was not going to perform sadness for her benefit or for mine. I was going to let it be exactly what she made it. A decision she made alone, without conversation, without consideration of what I might need or deserve. A decision she delivered in 11 words via text message on a Tuesday. She chose that. She chose to make it exactly that small. So I was going to let it be exactly that small. I was going to handle this like a person who respected himself. And then I was going to get on with my life. That decision didn't make the pain disappear. Let me be clear about that. The next few weeks were hard. Some mornings were genuinely difficult. Waking up and having that split second of forgetting, and then remembering, and feeling the weight settle back onto your chest before you've even fully opened your eyes. Bramwell sat with me through some of it. He didn't try to fill every silence. He just showed up, which is the only thing that actually matters when someone's going through something real. I kept going to work. I kept taking those Saturday morning runs, even alone, even when it felt mechanical and pointless. I kept going to the bookstore. I didn't stop doing the things I liked doing just because the person I used to do some of them with was gone. That's something people don't tell you about getting over someone. The going through motions part is not fake. The going through motions part is actually how you rebuild. You do the things. You feel nothing, or you feel sad, or you feel strangely free, or you feel all three at once. And then one day, without announcement, the motions stop being motions and start being your actual life again. It took me a while, but it happened. About 6 weeks after the text, Bramwell told me something. He was uncomfortable telling me. I could see it in the way he set down his glass before speaking, the way he looked at the table instead of at me. I heard something, he said. About Serafina. I waited. She was talking to someone else, he said. Before. Apparently for a while. Not a physical thing, he clarified quickly. More of an emotional thing. An ongoing conversation with someone she'd met through a work connection, some designer she'd done a collab project with. A guy named Torrance. I let that sit for a moment. Bramwell was watching my face carefully, bracing for something. But here's the thing that surprised even me. The information landed. I registered it. And then it settled into a place that already made sense. Not because I'd suspected it specifically, but because it explained the texture of those last weeks, the careful distance, the formal dinners, the canceled plans, the way she'd stopped looking at me the way she used to. She hadn't been not happy in a general, existential way. She had been not happy with me, specifically, in the context of a comparison she was actively making. And 11 words via text was how she chose to tell me. I nodded, picked up my glass. Thanks for telling me, I said. That's it. Bramwell said. What else do you want me to say? He thought about it. I don't know. I thought you'd be angrier. I understood why he thought that. But the truth is, the anger had already done its work quietly, in the weeks before, In all the moments I noticed something was off and talked myself out of it. The anger had been burning low for a while, and by the time Bramwell told me this, it had burned down to something cooler and cleaner. Something that felt a lot more like resolve. I was done. I had been done since I understand. This was just additional information that confirmed I was right to be done. It also, I realized, retroactively reframed everything about how the relationship had ended. She hadn't ended things because she was unhappy in some vague, undefined way. She'd ended things because she was already mentally, emotionally somewhere else, with someone else. And I was the last item on a checklist she was wrapping up. 11 words. That's what I got after 2 years. Because she was in a hurry to get somewhere else. I let that thought live in my head for exactly as long as it needed to. And then I made a conscious decision to stop giving it real estate. Because here is the thing I understood with increasing clarity. The way she ended things wasn't just an accident of communication style. It was a piece of information about who she was, how she handled things, and how much I had actually mattered in her decision-making. And that information had freed me from something I hadn't known I was still holding on to. I went home that night lighter than I'd felt in weeks. The months that followed were strange. Good strange, mostly. The kind of strange where your life is rearranging itself around a new center of gravity, and the rearrangement is uncomfortable, disorienting, occasionally lonely, but also, unmistakably, more yours than it had been in a while. I picked up things I had quietly set aside. I started a ceramics class that I'd been meaning to try for over a year. It was humbling. I was genuinely bad at it for months. Lopsided bowls, uneven rims, cups that looked like they'd been made by someone who'd only heard a cup described and had never actually seen one. But I kept going. Every Tuesday evening, clay on my hands, bad results, incremental tiny improvements. It became something I looked forward to. I started spending more time with people I'd slowly drifted away from while being in a relationship. Elwood, a guy I'd been friends with since college who I'd been meaning to reconnect with. Marcellus, a former colleague who'd moved to Brooklyn and kept inviting me to things I kept rescheduling. I stopped rescheduling. I showed up. And showing up, I discovered, has its own momentum. The more present I became in my own life, the more my own life had to offer back. That sounds simple. It is, in a way. But it's the kind of simple that requires the hard version of things to arrive first before you can see it clearly. I wasn't in a hurry to meet anyone. Let me be honest about that. I wasn't doing this self-improvement performance that people sometimes do in the aftermath of a breakup, where everything becomes about making yourself into someone more attractive for the next person. I was doing this for me, because I genuinely liked who I was becoming when I wasn't spending energy managing a relationship that had been quietly bleeding out for months. I felt awake in a way that I couldn't have fully described, but that was unmistakably real. Lighter, more curious, more willing to just try things, show up, exist without an agenda. And in that space, without looking for it, without needing it, without planning it, I met Fiora. It was at a gallery opening, which I know. The symmetry is not lost on me. But this one was different. This wasn't a Chelsea event full of people in black turtlenecks performing appreciation for art they didn't understand. This was a smaller thing. A friend of Elwood's had a piece in a show in a converted warehouse space in Bushwick, and Elwood had dragged a small group of us out there on a rainy Saturday afternoon. Fiora was standing near the back, studying a photograph so intently that she seemed entirely unconcerned with being at a social event. That's what I noticed first. Not her appearance. Her absolute lack of awareness that anyone was watching her. She was just there, entirely present with the thing she was looking at. I ended up standing near her at some point, also looking at the same photograph, a long exposure shot of a street corner at night, the lights blurred into something that looked almost like paint. "What do you see in it?" she said, without looking at me. She said it the way you might ask the question to yourself, not really expecting an answer from anyone specific. "Feels like a city that's trying to remember something," I said. She turned and looked at me then. Not with surprise, exactly. More with a kind of calm appraisal. "That's interesting," she said. "I was thinking it looked like forgetting." We argued about that for the next 20 minutes. Not aggressively. In the way that two people argue when they're actually enjoying each other's perspective. Her name was Fiora. She was a photographer, documentary work, primarily, the kind that takes you to places you didn't expect and shows you things in them you didn't know to look for. She was direct in a way that felt honest rather than aggressive. She asked what she wanted to know. She said what she was thinking. She didn't perform uncertainty she didn't feel, and she didn't pretend to certainty she wasn't sure of. There was no performance at all, really. She was just exactly herself. And I found that. I still find it one of the most attractive things a person can be. We talked for almost 2 hours. We ate bad cheese off a paper plate near the entrance. Elwood found me at some point and raised his eyebrows in a way that communicated everything without a word. When we left, she handed me her card, an actual physical card, which I found endearing, and said, "If you figure out what the photograph is actually about, let me know." I texted her the next day, not 3 days later, not with some calculated window of appropriate delay. The next day, because I wanted to, and because I'd stopped playing games with timing a long time ago. We got coffee. The coffee turned into a walk. The walk turned into dinner. And then, naturally, without pressure, without drama, without anyone needing to define anything before it was ready to be defined, it turned into something real. Fiora and I moved slowly, not because either of us was cautious in a wounded, protective way, but because we were both the kind of people who preferred to build things well rather than quickly. She didn't fill every silence. Neither did I. We'd sit on her fire escape in Carroll Gardens on summer evenings, drinking wine, watching the slow turn of the neighborhood below, and half the time we were just there together in the quiet, not needing words to make it feel like something. That quiet felt like the opposite of those last few months with Serafina. With Serafina, the silences had been loaded, full of things unsaid, distances uncrossed, questions I was afraid to ask. With Fiora, the silences were just comfortable, like two people who already knew the important things and didn't need to keep proving it. She told me, early on, that she had no interest in managing someone else's emotions for them. "I'll be honest with you," she said, "and I need that back. That's the only thing I actually need. Simple, clean, no games." I gave her that. She gave it to me. And it turned out that simplicity, genuine, uncomplicated mutual honesty, could build something more solid in 3 months than I'd had in the 28 months before. I didn't make comparisons out loud. That's bad practice and bad faith. But privately, quietly, I was becoming aware of something I hadn't fully let myself see before. I had spent 2 years in a relationship that had required a kind of constant management, a monitoring of temperature, a reading of signals, a careful self-editing to avoid triggers I couldn't always predict. I had called that love. I had told myself that relationships require work, and therefore the work was proof of love. But there's a difference between the work of building something and the work of maintaining a fiction. And I understood now, doing a lot of the second kind. With Fiora, I could just be. Not perfectly, not without disagreement or difficulty, but without performance. That difference, I won't minimize it. It was enormous. It had been almost 5 months since that Tuesday in the coffee shop. 5 months since 11 words. 5 months since I understand. I had largely stopped thinking about Serafina. Not in a forced way. Not in the way where you're constantly fighting to keep someone out of your thoughts. More in the natural way that happens when your actual life becomes genuinely full and interesting. She simply stopped being the thing I reached for in idle moments. My Tuesday ceramics class had yielded, at long last, a bowl I was actually proud of. My project at work had hit a major milestone. Fiora and I had spent a long weekend upstate, hiking in weather that was too cold for hiking, and I had come back feeling more like myself than I had in years. I was good, genuinely, unperformatively good. And then one October evening, sitting on my couch with a book I was actually reading this time, my phone lit up. A number I recognized immediately. Serafina. The message said, "Hey, I know it's been a while. I've been thinking about you. Is there any chance we could talk?" I looked at it for a long moment. Not with the trembling hands, racing heart reaction that I might have had 2 months in. Just looked at it. Read it again. Felt the way it landed. And noticed, with a kind of quiet surprise, how little it moved me. Not because I had hardened myself against her. Not because I was angry or nursing some elaborate plan for revenge. But because I had genuinely, completely moved on. And her message arriving felt less like a reopening of something and more like a piece of mail forwarded from an old address. It was meant for someone I used to be. That person wasn't here anymore. I set the phone down, picked up my book, read 2 more chapters, and then, because I'm not someone who believes in leaving things in the ambiguity of no response when a clear response will serve better, I picked the phone back up and typed. I thought about what to say for maybe 4 minutes. Not agonizing, just thinking. I didn't want to be cruel. Cruelty requires caring enough to invest in it, and I didn't have that kind of investment anymore. I didn't want to be cold, either, performatively distant in a way designed to communicate how much I'd moved on. That would also require caring about her perception of me. which I didn't, really. I just wanted to be honest, clean, respectful of both of us. So I wrote, "Hey Serafina, I hope you're doing well. I don't think that conversation would be useful for either of us at this point. I've moved on, and I imagine you have too. Take care." Sent it. Put the phone on the charger. Went to bed. I slept well. She replied the following afternoon. "That's fair. I just wanted to explain some things. I feel like I didn't handle the ending well." I read it. I sat with it for a moment. She wasn't wrong about that. She hadn't handled the ending well. But here's the thing about explanations offered months later. They're not for the recipient. They're for the sender. What she was really saying was, "I want to feel better about how I did this." And I understood that. But I also understood that my role in making her feel better about how she had ended things, with 11 words, without a conversation, while she was already emotionally elsewhere, was not a role I was obligated to play. I had given her the cleanest, most respectful exit she could have asked for. I understand. No drama. No begging. No extended post-breakup processing that she hadn't wanted. She had gotten everything she'd chosen by choosing to do it the way she did. I didn't reply for a while. When I did, I kept it short. "I appreciate you saying that. I really do hope you're well." She replied once more. "I heard you're seeing someone. I'm glad you're happy." I don't know who told her. New York is small in ways that surprise you. I didn't reply to that one. Not out of spite. There was just nothing useful left to say. And sometimes the most honest thing you can do is recognize when a conversation has reached its natural conclusion and let it end there. I let it end there. There's something I haven't told you yet. Something I found out much later, through a completely accidental channel. A mutual friend of Serafina and Elwood who mentioned it in passing, not knowing it would land the way it did. The man she'd been talking to while we were still together. Torrance. It hadn't become what she thought it would. Or maybe it had briefly, and then it hadn't. I don't know all the details, and I made a point of not asking for them, because the details weren't mine to collect. But the information that reached me, secondhand and incomplete, was that whatever she had redirected herself toward had not worked out the way she'd perhaps imagined it would when she was sending those careful, practiced messages in those last weeks of our relationship. I'm not telling you this as a triumph. I want to be clear about that. I'm not recounting it with the satisfaction of someone who wanted her to fail or who needed her to suffer to feel complete. I'm telling you because it reframed something I had already mostly processed. In those last weeks, she had been moving towards something she believed was better. She had been, essentially, making a trade. 2 years with me. Real, imperfect, with history and texture and a drawer at my apartment and a shelf of half-finished books. For something newer and more exciting and still in that early stage glow where nothing is difficult yet. And she'd made that trade by sending 11 words and a period. Not because I'd failed her. Not because there was something deeply broken between us that required such a clean, sudden break. But because she was running towards something that looked bright from a distance. People do that. It's very human. I'm not immune to it. But understanding it didn't make it less of a choice. And knowing how it turned out didn't make me feel vindicated. It made me feel something quieter. Sad, a little. Not for myself. For the version of her that had been so certain, so ready to restructure her whole relational life around something she hadn't yet fully seen. I hope she was okay. I genuinely meant that. But I was no longer the person she could bring that to. That position had been vacated by her own hand, by 11 words on a Tuesday, and it had been filled by someone who had come along later with a photographer's way of seeing things and a perfect argument about what a long exposure shot of a nighttime street corner might actually mean. Here's what 5 months of moving through pain and out the other side taught me, in no particular order. First, how someone ends things tells you more about them than the entire relationship did. 2 years, and the ending is 11 words via text message while she was already emotionally elsewhere. That's not a communication style. That's a character reveal. Second, I understand is not a concession. It's not defeat. It's not emotional repression or stoic performance. Sometimes understanding exactly what you're looking at and deciding not to fight it is the highest form of self-respect. Third, the version of the future you were privately building matters. It matters that I had been carrying plans she didn't know about. Not because she owed me those plans being realized, but because it taught me to say the things I was thinking sooner, not from anxiety or pressure, but from honesty. If I had told her where my head was at month 18, we either would have had the real conversation we needed to have, or I would have found out then, in a conversation, rather than later, in 11 words. Fourth, the period of rebuilding is not empty time waiting for the next thing. It is its own thing. It is, actually, one of the most important things. The Saturday runs alone. The lopsided ceramics bowls, the evenings at Elwood's, and the reconnection with Marcellus and the Bushwick Gallery in the rain. None of that was filler. All of it was construction. And fifth, most importantly, when you stop filling your life with the management of someone else's emotional ambivalence, you discover how much space there is for things that are actually good. I'm sitting right now at a coffee shop. Not the one on West 86th, a different one, in Carroll Gardens, closer to where Fiora and I have started spending most of our weekends. My cup is warm. My laptop is open. And for the first time in a long time, the document isn't blank. I've been typing for the past hour, and it's been easy. Not effortless, but easy. The difference, I think, is that I'm writing from a life I actually want to be inside of. That's the thing about moving on, the real kind, not the performed kind. Nobody announces it. There's no moment where you throw open a window and declare yourself healed. It just happens, quietly, in the accumulation of days that eventually add up to a life that is genuinely yours again. You look up one day and realize you haven't thought about the thing that hurt you in a week, and then a month, and then a notification arrives from an old number and you read it and feel almost nothing. Not anger, not longing, not even the satisfaction of not feeling. Just the mild, clear recognition that you are somewhere else now, somewhere better. About 3 months after that October exchange, so almost 8 months after the original text, she messaged one more time. Just once. It said, "I don't know if you'll read this, but I wanted to say I'm sorry. Not for ending things. For how I ended them. You deserved a conversation. You deserved more than what I gave you at the end. I hope you know that I know that." I read it. Read it again. And I felt something unexpected. Not anger. Not relief. Not the complicated cocktail of emotions I might have felt if this had arrived 2 or 3 months after the fact, when I was still in the rawer part of it all. I felt, actually, a kind of simple, clean respect for her saying it. It was honest. It was accurate. She was right. I had deserved a conversation. And saying it, even 8 months late, even when it could change nothing, even when it was clearly more for her than for me, still required something. I thought about what to reply. Took a long time. Then I typed, "Thank you for saying that. I mean it. I hope things are good for you." And I meant that, too. Both things. Both were true at once. That's the strange, non-cinematic truth about how these things actually end. Not with slamming doors or grand declarations or the satisfying narrative arc of one person winning and one person losing, but with two people, separated by the width of a screen and the distance of 8 months, being honest with each other in small ways. Being slightly more decent than the worst version of themselves could have been, and then going back to their separate lives, which is what I did. Phone down, coffee warm, document open. Fiora had texted me earlier, "Dinner tonight?" I found a place. Trust me. I texted back, "Always." Then I went back to work. If you're waiting for the part where I say I think about her sometimes, here it is. I do. Not often. Not with longing. More the way you occasionally think about a version of yourself that existed in a different chapter. Not with regret, exactly, but with the quiet acknowledgement that it was real, that it mattered, that it shaped some part of what came after. She shaped some part of what came after. The way that things that end us, not destroy us, just end us, just redirect us, always do. I'm grateful for the 2 years. Even the hard parts. Even the last few weeks of careful distances and loaded silences. Even the Tuesday afternoon in the coffee shop when the phone lit up and 11 words rearranged my life. Because if that text had never arrived, I might still be there, sitting across from someone at a restaurant in the West Village, talking carefully about safe things, holding plans I hadn't yet said out loud, slowly quieting the voice that kept saying something is wrong. Instead, I walked out of a coffee shop on Broadway into the cold, said, "I understand," to someone who had already made up her mind, and gave myself the only thing I actually needed in that moment. Permission to leave. Permission to start over. Permission to build something real with someone who showed up, fully, honestly, without performance, on a rainy Saturday afternoon in Bushwick, arguing about whether a photograph was about remembering or forgetting. We still haven't settled that argument, actually. We probably never will. And honestly, I think that's one of my favorite things about us. Some doors close in 11 words. The right ones open in silence.